a bit late to the party, Barbie.
Oops, sorry, after you.
Just fight me already.
Oh, no, please,
sheesh.
after you. OMG, another AI animation tutorial, like, really?
Hey, and welcome to the AI Animation YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into using Wonder Studio from Wonder Dynamics, which allows you to use AI to swap out a filmed actor or yourself on live action footage with a CGI character. Then we're going to explore what you can do with some of the other downloadable files, including how you can create a quick budget version of a character pass in Adobe After Effects, before exploring how you can do that using a Blender scene, which you can download from Wonder Dynamics as well. And then we'll look at adding a lightsaber and some classic digital animation techniques to bring the scene more and more to life. Plus, towards the end, we're going to make some alternative backgrounds with Runway ML and use Topaz AI to scale those up. So the video is going to get quite complex at times, and there are some paid tools used here and there. Right, yeah, I think that's it. On with the video. We'll do a deeper dive in the future where we'll swap out the CGI character with one of our own, but for ease today, we're just going to use a Wonder Dynamics character from their small library of CGI characters that are already good to go. So first of all, we just need a bit of video footage. So I'm going to hop over to Envato Elements, and I found this nice clip here of two medieval people fighting. So I've downloaded that. So in Wonder Studio, we're going to press Open App. I've already got an account set up, and I have paid the current monthly subscription of $99, which just gives you a few more options above the slightly lower tier. Then I'm going to press Create New Project, Continue, and we're going to upload our video. Then once it's uploaded, you can grab hold of the clip and drag it onto here or down to the timeline, let go, and it will take a second and then populate on the timeline. You can then spin through the footage and find a nice clean frame where you can see the actor or actors nice and clearly. And then once you're happy with that frame, you can go up and press Next. You have a little prompt saying Scan frame for actors. Press Scan. It's found our actors. You click on one of these and we get the prompt Select a Character. And then you can press Expand Character Library to see who's available. And you can see there's more characters coming soon. You can also add your own characters, which we'll delve into in a future video. So for the actor on the left, I think we're going to go for this cool robot here, ASC, and press Assign. Then we click on the second actor, and again, we can roll out here and choose an actor that we like. I quite like this character called BeastieBot, so we're going to press Assign. We can then press Next, choose our output. MP4 is fine, and we're actually just going to choose everything we can, because if you try and choose it later, I think you're unable to. So we'll just go for all the options now, and then we've got the option to play with it in the future. Then press Start Processing. Now it does take quite a long time for Wonder Studio to process the footage. So this was just a 5-second clip, and it's estimating 131 minutes to process the footage, which might seem like a long time, but to be fair, it is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's tracking the scene, rotoscoping, painting out the backgrounds, providing 3D data, and it typically does a very impressive job. So we're going to leave that here, and you can close the website and come back later and download the assets once ready. And this gives me another convenient moment to talk about AIanimation.com, a new site we've set up to help showcase creatives using AI tools to assist in animation production. So if you're creating some cool, compelling, and professional level work using AI, head over there, register for free, and you can create a profile, upload videos to a portfolio, network, and potentially find paid work in the future. And yeah, that's it. Back to the video. So Wonder Studio has finished processing that clip, and we can play this. And it's painted out the two medieval fighters and replaced them with our cool robots. It's still kept in the footage of the swords. There are a couple of instances where we can see the original actor rather than the CGI character. We could rerun the clip through Wonder Studio or actually fix it quickly using Blender later on. Okay, and now I'm going to download the clean plate and the Blender scene. So the AI mocap will give you an FBX file, whereas we're going to use the data in a Blender scene. You can also get the alpha mask, which gives you a painted out black mask of where the original actors were. We're also going to export the video and download that as well. In the future, you'll also be able to download a camera track and a separate character pass, but we can create those ourselves today with our own approach. And now I've opened up Adobe After Effects, which is part of the Creative Cloud Suite, and we're going to bring in some of those files, and I'll show you what we can do here to start with. So we have our Clean Plates download. If we double click that, and unzip it, we get this folder full of our JPEG sequence. So if we head over to the project window, press Command I or Control I to import, and then click any of these still images, tick Import a JPEG sequence, which should be on by default, press open, and it brings in our sequence. We can then drag that down to the new composition button, let go, and it will create our still sequence. We can also bring in the file from Wonder Studio, drop that on top. If you click here and check out the window here, you can see the frame rate for the original video clip. So it's 29.97 frames per second. And the image sequence is set to 30 frames per second, and we want to keep those the same throughout. So if you right click on the image sequence, press Interpret Footage, Main, and change the frame rate to match 29.97. And then to get a slightly crude character pass by itself, we can right click on the output layer, choose Effect, Keying, and choose Difference Matte. And on the Difference Matte effect, it's going to, as the name implies, work out the difference between two layers. So we're going to choose the difference layer as the clean plate. We're actually going to create a new solid. Red is fine. Drop that between our two layers. So with the output layer selected, you can see it's already done a good job there. Matching tolerance 15, set it to 0. And as you cycle up, you'll see how it jumps between the two and finds the difference between the two scenes. You can then hide the others, and you have characters on a transparency, which can be handy for doing some quick compositing. There are scenes where it's going to get slightly confused, where the colors between the difference matte and the clean plate are the same. But again, you could play around with the tolerance, potentially keyframing it, or doing some masking just to tidy things up. I just wanted to quickly show that, as it can be a handy compositing tip, especially whilst we can't download a separate character pass from Wonder Studio yet. Next, I'm going to jump into Blender and show how you can use the Blender file from Wonder Studio and make use of some of that 3D data without being an expert in Blender, which I am certainly not. I'm far more happy in the world of Cinema 4D. But here we go. So here we are in Blender. If you've never used it before, it's an open source, free 3D software that's just gone from strength to strength over the years, and I've never really given it much thought or attention. But this project's given me reason to start to learn it. So yeah, this is the overall interface. The file that you download from Wonder Studio will come as a zip file, and then when you open it up, you have your Blender file and you have a README text file. Open up the text document, copy the URL that's here, and then when you visit that page, you can download the textures for any of the characters that you choose from their library, and then you can save those onto your computer wherever you prefer, and then I'll show you how you connect those up in a second. We're just going to open up our Blender file. You can see our scene with our two fighters. Up in the top right, you can choose the shading mode. We have the material preview, and we have a version which gives us a full rendered version. But until the textures are relinked, it will appear in this hot pink color. If you go up to File, External Data, Find Missing Files, you can then jump to the folder where you've saved your missing textures and press Find Missing Textures. Give it a couple of seconds, and then do the same for the second character. And there we go. Our characters are now textured. If you tap the button up here on the right, you can click the camera icon and get the camera view. You can ignore the ball in the middle. That's just one of the bones, which is part of the way that Wonder Studio creates the Blender file. As we saw earlier in Wonder Studio, there is a scene where the character disappears briefly, and it happens a couple of times in the footage. So the way around this is with our character, we can right-click once you select them, choose a select hierarchy, and you'll see down there in the keyframes, if we just shrink that down, click on the one either side of this gap, we can right-click, delete keyframe, and the one on the other side, delete keyframe. And now when you spin through, the character is still there, and there is movement as it tweens between frame 56 and 60. If we wanted to, we could go in and set the position manually, and later on when the character does a roll, we could spend some time reanimating that if we needed to. So whether it's because Wonder Studio is moving the character off somewhere else and getting confused, or it's setting keyframes to hide them, this is a quick way around it. And if you simply wanted to export this scene now, you could go to your render settings over here, press output, check the frame rate matches your scene. So we know from earlier that our video footage is 29.97 frames per second, so we can set that here as a frame rate. You can also set your output and choose where you want your renders to be saved. If you go to the render menu here as well, the little camera icon, you can go down and turn on motion blur. You could then go up to render and press render image for a still image or render animation to see the full sequence. Just press render now, have a quick check. And there we go, it's rendered out our two characters on a transparency, and we can go ahead and render out the full sequence and use that instead of the difference matte approach used earlier on in the video. But before we do that, I want to do a bit more to the scene, play around with the lighting, and try and add some 3D swords to our characters, as well as some tracking data for the swords that we can then play around with in After Effects as well. If we look in the stack of objects, you'll see there's lights here, and you click on the sun, we can set a color. So we're going to go for a pinky purple hue. We change to the rendered mode. You can see how that's impacting our characters here already, which is pretty cool. Then I'm going to download this free, kind of basic light cyber model from TurboSquid. That's a Blender file, and drop that into the scene. So if we go ahead, grab our lightsaber file, drag it over the top, press append, and I have already opened this file to check the file name. If you head into Object, Cylinder, and press append, it's going to add our lightsaber model to the scene. Quickly scale that down a little. And then to attach the sword to the armature of one of our characters, we need to make a new bone. So we press add, armature, and it creates this individual bone here. And again, we can scale this down, move it up so it's going to be somewhere in line with our sword. Just going to rotate it out slightly so we can see it. And then we're going to link the sword to the bone. So first of all, we select the sword, and then we select the bone holding down Shift, and then press Command P on a Mac or Control P on a PC and press Object. Now, you select the bone by itself, we can move the bone around and the sword will come with it. We can then move this bone over to where we would like to position it. And then with the bone selected, we can go over to the menu here, choose Constraints, drop down and choose Child of, and then we need to find the armature for this character here. So if you jump up, you can see it's this guy here. So with our bone selected, on Constraint, you can choose the target and select the armature for that character. Once you do that, this new field will appear for bone, and you can click on there and spin through and find the bone that you want to attach your sword bone to. So we're going to go for middle finger on the left hand. You press that and you'll see that the lightsaber on the bone disappears. If you press set inverse, it will move the position back to its origin. Now when we play the animation, our character has a sword in their hand. And we're going to repeat that same process for our other character, and we can play around with the scale of the sword and things like that. There I've added the second lightsaber, and now we want to add some points that we can track to provide data to After Effects for where the lightsabers actually are in physical space. So if we go ahead and press Add, Empty, Plane Axis, we can grab hold of this axis here and position it at the base of where we want to see this fiery flame from the lightsaber. Okay, we have that one. We can give that a name, base 1. Then we're going to copy and paste to create a second one of these. Move it out, and then we're going to position this one at the tip of our lightsaber. We have our base and our tip, and we want to connect these to our lightsaber. So we click on the base, choosing constraints here, do the drop down, choose child of, and we pick our lightsaber, which we've named Cylinder 01 on that side, and then choose the tip, do the same again, child of, and pick the lightsaber. Now when we go through the animation, we have these 2 points which are being tracked with the motion of the sword, and that's data we can then send on to After Effects later on. Just repeat the same thing for the other lightsaber. Now before we can render this and jump the hell out of Blender, I want to set up a matte for our 2 lightsabers, our 2 swords. So we can do a little bit of setup in compositing with the material, just so that we have this separate render pass just of the lightsabers, so that when they are occluded by one of the characters, we can use that when compositing any effects in After Effects. So to do this, we're going to move to the View Layer tool here, scroll down, and on Cryptomatte, make sure that Object is selected. Now, before we move into the compositing window up here, we're going to press Render. We can do Render and render an image. And with that done, we're going to minimize that window, press Compositing, and then in this window, when you first open it up, you'll find all of these layers stacked on top of each other, and you just pull them apart till you find one called Render Layers. The ones here are generated by Wonder Studio when it creates that first Blender file, so you can ignore all of these and leave them well alone. And we just want to concentrate on having that Render Layers file so we can link to the image output. Now this is kind of confusing, but I am going to keep it as simple as possible. If you right click and choose Search and search for Crypto, we're going to add a Cryptomatte panel. Position that down here. Then if we right click again and we're going to add a viewer, I can go here, and then we're going to right click again and add an output, file output. And these are the only things we're going to need. First of all, we're going to link our image to the viewer. If we do that, we get a preview of our last render in the background. We're also going to link that image down to our Cryptomatte, and then making sure that we have Crypto Object selected here, we're going to press the plus for Matte ID and select our lightsaber, and add another one and choose the other lightsaber. So it's added cylinder 1 and cylinder 001 to the Matte ID. We're then going to pass that image output from the Cryptomatte, and we can pass that over to the viewer just to quickly preview it. With that selected to the viewer, we can then see the output coming from our Cryptomatte, so we just have those two lightsabers, which is what we're after. We're then going to look at the File Output tab here. If you go up to Node, drop down Properties, you can see that we're saving a PNG. It's going to our 3D renders file that we set up earlier. You could reset that somewhere else if you needed to, and then we're going to be saving our output. You could have multiple objects added and saved to this output, but we're just having this one extra file. So we're going to take our image output from the Cryptomatte, link it to the image of our file output. If we double click on image, we can give it a new name, Lightsaber Pass. And that's it. You can then press save. You can jump back into layout or animation, just to spin through your scene, make sure you're happy with it, and then go up to render and press render animation. And whilst it does that, you can take yourself off for a nice cup of tea, maybe a quick beer, or have a bath, whatever you're into. If you want to check the renders are looking correct, you can hop into the folder and preview your renders as they go. So you can see we've got the characters here on a transparency holding their lightsabers with that pink sunlight. And again, we have separate files for the lightsabers by themselves. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering that scene, and before we can close Blender for the rest of the tutorial, I want to show you a couple of extra tracking points I want to add, and then show how to export that tracking data using a free script for Blender so you can use it in After Effects. So I've already added one point here, so we have the bottom of the left character, and as we move through the scene, it just keeps track of where the lowest point is for our character. And you see it jumps between the feet, depending which one is the lowest, and it just gives us a useful tracking point. So to do this, we're going to go up to Add, Empty, Plane Axis, and if we move out the scene and zoom out slightly, you can see where it's positioned. We're going to grab it, position it in line with our character, really far down, and then we're going to go to Constraints, press Add Object Constraint, choose Shrink Wrap, and then with the eyedropper, move over our character's mesh. We want the one called Object Bodysuit 001, and it will jump to the lowest point. And then as you move through, it'll jump between left foot and right foot, depending which one's lowest, and gives us that handy bit of data. So I'm just going to give that a name. Now to export the scene data, we're going to need to add a script, which I've already got set up here, but I'll show you the process. If you go to Edit, Preferences, and Add-ons, you'll find a suite of different add-ons that you can install. If you search for After Effects, it might appear here depending on which version of Blender you're using. If it's not available, and it's probably not available by default, you need to download a free Python script which you can grab from GitHub. I'll include a link below in the video description. But come to the URL and you can press download, hop back into Blender, press install, and browse to where you've downloaded the file and press install add-on. Once installed, make sure you turn it on, and then you can close the Blender preferences. Back in the scene, highlight any data that you want to save out. So we're going to take those 2 tracking points at the bottom of our character, the camera, and we also want the base and tip of our lightsabers. So with all of those selected, we can go to File, Export, Adobe After Effects, and press Export to Adobe After Effects. We can then save and say goodbye to Blender. Okay, and we're back in Adobe After Effects now, and I've gone through and tidied up my folders. We have our Blender renders imported. Our main composition, we've called that character composition, and I've put the files for Wonder Studio in a little folder there. So on our composition, we have the Blender render, which we can spin through, and if I solo the top layer, we have our lightsabers by themselves, which are looking suitably cool. Right, we can then import the tracking data. So to do that, we go File, Scripts, Run Script File, and then navigate to where you saved out that tracking data file. So we then open the JSX file, give it a name, and it will create a composition. Open that up and spin through and see the various tracking points, the nulls in After Effects moving around. We can bring in our Blender scene, and you can see they're all nicely lined up, moving with the base and the tip of the lightsaber and the lowest point of our characters. Now we want to give some glowing effects to our lightsabers and play around with the colors. So we're going to be using a free plugin from Video Copilot called Saber, which you can download here, and I'll include a link in the video description. So download that and install it into After Effects. Then with that in place, you're going to highlight all the layers, right click, and choose Pre-Compose, or otherwise press Command-Shift-C on a Mac or Control-Shift-C on a PC. We're then going to add a new solid, call it Saber, and then right-click, go Effects, Video Copilot, Saber. Now to access the tracking points for those lightsabers, we're going to use a paid plugin called Layer Stalker, which is $24.99 from aescripts.com. And again, I'll include a link in the description. You could write your own script and extension to achieve much the same, but this saves an awful lot of time. So in the Layer Stalker plugin, you press Choose Target Layer, scroll down to your character scene, and highlight the different things we want to track. So we're going to choose Tip Saber, stalk this layer, and it creates a null which moves around in our scene. And we're going to repeat that step for the base. And the reason we're doing it this way around rather than using the tracking data in here is because these ones have got 3D tracking data. Whereas Saber is actually a 2D plugin, it can only use the X and Y axis for positioning the lightsaber. And by using Layer Stalker, it gives us an X and Y based on its position within our frame. We can then drop down the Saber plugin effect, and we have Core Start and Core End. Press P on your stalking layers, so you can see the position variable. And then on the Core Start, we're going to click and go up to the base and highlight the position, let go. And Core End, again, do the same, but for the tip of the lightsaber. And then we have our lightsaber moving around. And then on the Saber layer, we can reveal the blending modes, and we're going to choose Screen. And now we have our blue lightsaber moving around. And you could go in and play around with the Saber effect, adding flicker, extra distortion to the core, or to the overall glow, and things like that. Now I'm going to quickly repeat those steps for the other lightsaber. I'm going to duplicate the Saber layer, double tap U to open up the used variables, and we're going to link to the other lightsaber. We now have both our lightsabers, give those some names, and the saber on the left, we can go up to color and change the glow color to a hot pink, which looks pretty cool. There are some sections of the animation where the lightsaber and the saber effect are appearing in front of our character when they should be behind, so we can make use of our separate lightsaber paths from Blender to help fix that. So I'm going to go ahead, grab our lightsaber and our main Blender file, put the lightsaber at the top, and then on our main Blender render, we're going to choose Track Matte and choose the lightsaber pass, which gives us this, and then we're going to invert it. So now the lightsaber is missing from this scene. If we click on the lightsaber, because there is some spill here, and if we right click in Effects, choose Matte, Match Choker, we can drop the choke value down to a negative till it's almost completely got rid of the lightsaber. We can also reduce the grey level softness, and we can increase the iterations if needed to help get rid of more of that lightsaber. We can unsolo the render, go down to our lightsaber level. Then with one of our saber layers selected, we can set the track map for those, go up and choose that blender render layer and press invert on the mat. And it moves it to behind the character, and we can do the same for the pink lightsaber as well. Now when we go through the animation, the lightsabers are appearing behind our character when they need to and in front of them at other times. I've done a quick bit of housekeeping and put some unneeded compositions into a miscellaneous folder and renamed our scene characters with sabers. Now we want to look at the background. So I'm going to go down to Wonder Studio and bring in that clean plate. If we solo that, now if we wanted to, we could rotoscope out these swords or draw a big mask over the top. But really we just want the camera tracking data for this. So I'm going to click on our scene and then press Window, Tracker, and then this window here will appear and just press Track Camera. And you can carry on working whilst it does this in the background, or go and get yourself another cup of tea. Okay, one lovely cup of tea later and my camera tracking has completed. If you then click on your clean plate layer and the 3D camera tracker effect, you'll see all these points here. If you can't see them, you might need to increase the track point size. You can then click on an individual point or click and draw a circle to select a certain area. Right click and choose Create Solid or Create Null and Camera. And this creates a null and a camera. If I change to 2 viewpoints, so we have a top view and zoom out, as we spin through, you'll see the camera is rotating and it's matching the movement of the camera in the filmed scene. And I assume in the scene it was just filmed on a tripod because there's very little in the way of sideways or forward motion. And we have this null which moves around in the scene, fixed to that position on that grassy hill. We now need an exciting image to use for our background, and to do that we're going to use an AI generation tool in the form of Midjourney before doing some 3D displacement mapping similar to what I've done in a previous video, but taking a slightly different approach to work with this 3D tracked camera. So first we're going to hop over to Midjourney and we're going to press plus and we're going to upload the first frame from that clean plate that we downloaded from Wonder Studio. Press enter and it'll upload the image to Midjourney. We're then going to press /. You can just press enter or type imagine, and then we get this prompt box and we can click our image, drag it down and write out our prompt. So we're going to try the prompt of realism, photoreal, galactic dystopian background with the debris of robot battles to the death on the floor, and then we've got this bit of code --AR169 and then --IW 0.5. So the first one tells Midjourney that we want a 16:9 image, and then the IW stands for image weight, and you can go up to 2, and this dictates how much weight, how much bearing this image will have on the final output. Press enter. I really like this first one here, so I've gone ahead and upscaled that. Press web and save to your computer. Now I've opened that image up in Photoshop, and thanks everyone for commenting on my last video for this tip. As Photoshop have added a way of making depth maps directly within Photoshop. So go up to Filter, press Neural Filters, and go down, and there's one called Depth Blur, which if you've not used it before, you will need to download it from the cloud, but then once it's there, you can turn it on, move down and tick Output Depth Map Only, and it creates our depth map. Then press OK, and save that to your computer. Now I've imported the background scene and that depth map to our After Effects project in a background folder. We can click both of those, drag them down into our scene, and scale them up. We're now going to use another plugin. This one's free and from ascripts.com, and it just provides a few more options when doing displacement, and it works well with our tracked camera data. So we're going to right click, choose Plugin Everything, Displacer Pro, and then choose our map layer, which is our depth map. And then if you translate on the X and Y, you get this cool 3D effect, which is fantastic. And we want to link that up with our camera rotation. So we drop down to our camera, open the transform parameters, and you see we have position and orientation. We're going to link up the X and Y of these rotations. So we're going to drop down the effect for Displacer Pro, transform, and then we have our X and Y. And we're going to pick whip the X from Displacer Pro and link that up to the X rotation. And then the Y, we're going to link up with the Y rotation. So when you spin through this, it moves nicely with the camera, until you get to this point where it's going to break because the value of the orientation has changed to a negative. Because of how orientation works, it displays it as a 360 degree, so it goes into 359. So to do this, we're going to fix it with a little bit of expression. So we can go into here, copy a expression here, and the easiest way is to jump into ChatGPT or Bing Chat and write, I have this AE expression, paste in your expression, please make it so that when the value goes over 180, it minuses 360. And it's written this helpful bit of code, which we can copy, jump into here, click on our x-axis and paste that. And we still have the problem with the y-axis, so we can do the same question again, grab this bit of code. It's very similar. It's essentially swapped out the zeros for ones, copy that, paste that into here. Now when we move through the scene, the X and Y move as we need to. We can then also link up the rotate value of the effect, so we can pick whip that and choose the Z orientation. So again, we're going to drop this down, grab that code, copy that, hop over to ChatGPT on Bing, and we get the code for that. Jump back into After Effects, paste that in there, and now when we move around the scene, it distorts and tracks with our camera. And whilst I recommend that approach, and you can chat with GPT yourself, I will include the expressions I've got here in the description for this video as well. So now we have our scene moving around in a cool way with some pseudo 3D depth. We can then grab our character scene, drag that up to the top just to see how they sit in the scene. Scroll down to the bottom of the Displacer Pro effect, and for edge behavior, we can turn on mirror repeat, and that will extend our scene. And we can also turn on anti-aliasing and put it onto 2 times, and that just improves some of the pixels when they're distorting to make it a bit smoother. You can also play around with various parameters within the effect, i.e. you can change the gamma, see how that affects the depth perception, scale, which creates some cool effects. Also the anchor X gives some cool changes as well. Next, to make the characters look as if they're seated in the scene a bit better and placed in that 3D environment, we want to add some shadows on the floor. There are a few different ways we could add shadows. We could do a separate pass in Blender and put a plane underneath the 3D characters, render that out as a matte shadow material. But I'm going to show you 2 different techniques within Adobe After Effects that allows you to achieve a shadow without having to jump back into Blender. So first of all, we can go down, click on our clean plate where we did our camera tracking earlier. We can draw around some of these tracking points, right click, create solid. It's given us this tracked solid. We can then press S to bring up the scale attributes, unlock those, and drag out the X and slightly scale up the Y, and that will move around with our scene. We can move that below our characters. We're then going to duplicate our characters, press S, unlock those, and on the Y-axis, scale it to -100 so they're flipped. Move it down, add a blur, so right-click, blur and sharpen, Gaussian blur, and we're going to up that quite a lot. And then we can hide that layer. Then clicking back on the tracked solid, which we can call shadows, we can call that top one shadow matte. And then we're going to click on our shadows and use that shadow matte as our layer. And we have these funky looking red shadows. So we can right click, generate fill. You could also just change the color of the solid, but this works as well. Choose color, and we're going to choose a dark gray. We then have shadows moving along with our characters. And there's times where it's, depending on your scene, it won't work. Also on the shadow layer, we can change the blending mode. We can either click one you think is going to work, i.e. color burn, or with that layer selected, hold down Shift and go plus or minus, and you can cycle through the different blending modes to find one that gives a nice result. I'm going to go for overlay, and you can also drop the opacity. So press T to bring up the opacity variable and reduce that down to about 67%. And it's all looking quite nice there, but you will notice this character looks like he's floating above the scene, and that's partly due to the image we've created in Midjourney and the way the depth's being perceived by Displacer Pro and that depth pass. And a quick fix is to grab hold of our shadow matte, our character scene, our shadows, and the layer that the sabers are using for their own matte. Grab those, and we can bump them down, holding down Shift and the down arrow, moving our characters into a position that we're happy with. And then as we play through the scene, it's all looking a lot nicer. Now I'm going to quickly undo that and show you a more complicated but useful way of creating shadows, which might be useful for a project like this or something else you're working on. So I've reverted back to before we've added those shadows, and using the layer stalker effect again, we're going to press choose target, and then inside our character scene, we're going to grab hold of the bottom of the right character that we tracked in Blender and send it over to After Effects. Press stalk this layer, and we get a null for that, and do it again for the bottom of the left character. So we now have two nulls that move around with our characters. Now we're going to use another plugin by Video Copilot, and this one is free and it's called VC Reflect. So head over to the website, I'll put a link in the description, and download and install that for After Effects. And with that installed, I'm just going to show you what it does. If you right click and create a new adjustment layer, add the effect, Video Copilot, VC Reflect, you can click on floor position, and it creates a reflection of the scene. And that's quite a cool look. So it's just a quick way of giving this sort of scene something extra fancy, and it looks like you're doing amazing CG because you've got the reflections going on. But we obviously want those shadows. So we're going to copy our effect, delete the adjustment layer, duplicate our character scene again, move that to the top, paste in the effect, and we want to be able to track the point at the bottom of our character. We're then going to quickly do a mask over our character on the left, drop down the mask parameters, drop down the mask properties, press the keyframe toggle, and set some keyframes just to mask the left character. We're then going to roll down the position parameters for our null for the left character, and the effect properties here for VC Reflect, and we want to link that floor position to the position of our null. So we pick whip and point to the position here. And then no matter where we are in the scene, we get a reflection which is tracking with our character. Then in the VC Reflect effect, we can change the color of the shadow to a dark gray, increase the blur, and skew the angle. We're going to change it to -30. So the shadow is now pointing slightly off to the left, which kind of matches the lighting of the scene. We might go a bit further and do -50. And if we want to, we can drop the opacity slightly. We can then duplicate our character scene, press M and invert our mask so that it's only showing this character. It looks quite good already, but we want to make sure that this reflection is going to be tracking our character on the right. So again, we can roll down the effect for VC Reflect for this layer and link it to the position of the null for our right character. Then as we move through, we get those cool shadows. Now we still have the issue where the characters are a bit too high up for the scene based on our artwork, and we want to bump them down. And unfortunately, we can't just grab hold of the character scene, and I'll show you why if we solo these. So with the character scene selected, if we bump that layer down by itself, the shadows get quite confused and become disconnected from the references because they're referencing nulls within that scene. So the way around this is to go into our character scene, copy out our characters, jump back into our main comp, paste our characters, and then we're going to hide this character scene layer, give this one a new name. We can then grab hold of our saber layers, our main characters, right shadow, left shadow, and that track map that the lightsabers are using. And again, holding down shift and the down arrow, we can jump down and seat them in the position that we're happier with. You might find the scenes running a lot slower once you've got the VC Reflect effect in place because it's a little bit more processor heavy. So when you're not using it, you can just go down and hide it. You can then jump through your scene a bit quicker. Just remember to turn it on when you're rendering. I'm now going to render it out so we can add a couple of post effects, including some lens flares that will track with our 3D camera and a few other bits of stock effects just to liven up the scene. So we're going to go up to composition, add to render queue. We're just going to do an MP4, a high bitrate MP4, call it Saber Animation Before Post Effects. Press save and render. Now whilst that renders, I am going to go and get another cup of tea. This tutorial's taken a couple of days to make as I've done it on and off, and I've got a bit of man flu. Dreaded man flu. Felt like crap this morning. But the power of Lemsip has helped see me through. Thanks everyone who has checked out the first tutorial I posted last week. It's been amazing seeing the amount of success and the amount of views that video's had, and all the comments have been really interesting. If you haven't already and you are interested in this sort of video, please press subscribe, press like, leave a comment. And yes, if you are an animator or a creative using AI tools mixed with digital animation techniques and you're interested in having a place to showcase your work and potentially win client work, please head over to aianimation.com where you can register for free. Right, time for a cup of tea or maybe another lemsip. Now that's finished rendering, I've gone ahead and made an AE renders folder and imported the rendered out MB4. We can drag that down and check out the render. And it looks pretty cool. They float around a little bit where the depth isn't spot on, but it gives a nice effect. In the very first frame, the lightsabers get confused where the tracking points for the lightsabers go a bit awry, but we can just trim off that first frame. I'm then going to go ahead and grab hold of the 3D tracker camera and our clean plate, which has the tracking data on, paste those into our scene, move those to the bottom. We can then click on our clean plate, go up to effects, go 3D camera tracker, and again, we've got this information. And just to have a point of reference, we can click on one of these, right click, create a null, don't need a second camera. We're then going to add a 3D lens flare to our scene. So first of all, we need a light. So we're going to right click, go new, light, and just 100% intensity. We don't need shadows, that's fine. And then we're going to copy the position from our null and paste that onto our light. And then right click again, go new, adjustment layer. We're going to use the paid plugin from Video Copilot that allows you to add dynamic 3D optical flares. So if we right click in the effects panel, go Video Copilot, optical flares. Down for source type, we're going to choose track lights. For render mode, we're going to say over original. And we're going to position the light in 3D space until we're happy. Give our lens flare layer a name. And we can set the center point for where that lens flare is pointing. We can play around with the brightness. And at the moment, it's set to take the color from the light. So we can click on the lights, double click and set the color. So I think from the left, I want to have a slight pink hue. And we're going to drop down that brightness. And we have this lens flare that moves around in our scene. We can then go ahead and duplicate the light, move it to the other side, again position it where we think is a good spot. I'm going to push it really far away on the Z-axis. And if you press T on the light, we can up the intensity, which gives you separate control for each individual light. Again, we can click on the lens flare and set the center position, moving that around so we find something that we like. We can also go into options within the Optical Flares plugin, and you can try out different presets for lens flares. You can also build your own ones. Let's go for the Bay one, the Michael Bay anamorphic style lens flare. It goes suitably over the top. Let's pull that light over there and drop the intensity. Also within the lens flare options, you can scroll down and there's a thing called lens texture. And it adds things like grime, scratches and dust as if there is a real lens filming this scene. We can press OK and it looks really quite intense, as you can see there. But again, we can play around with the brightness here to reduce that, or alternatively in the options on the lens texture, you can change the brightness here. And we can keep moving the lights around, finding positions that we're happy with. And you can also set keyframes if you wanted to, or you can move them really far away as if it's, and you can move them around, have them track with spaceships, planets, distant suns, anything like that. And as a final touch, we want to get some sparks as our fighters clash before this one tucks some rolls. And I'm just going to use this stock clip from Envato Elements, which has got all these sparks going on. So I've brought this clip into the scene, and I'm just going to position it just as the death strike happens here. Just find a suitable bit of this footage. We can then go to Effects and choose Color Correction CC Toner and pick some lighting from our scene. Might actually try the pink. And now we have some pink sparks that kind of match the scene and the environment. Now, before I wrap up on this tutorial, I want to show 3 quick ideas on how you could further develop the scene and swap things out to further push the creativity, including the last one where we're going to use Runway ML to swap out the background entirely with an AI-generated background. You could jump into the original scene and grab hold of your character pass, bring that out and paste it on top. And that will help them stand out from the scene if you want to do something quick like that. But you can also, on the lens flare, go down and there's a foreground layers property here. And on layer 1, you can assign that to this new character layer, hide the characters, and then create another light. And then when that light goes behind any of the characters, you'll get a nice reaction from the lens flare. Another thing you can do in your scene in here, where we have our background pass, you can add an effect to control the focus of the scene. So we can right click, choose camera lens blur, For blur map, we can choose our depth map. We can up the blur value to 10 or whatever works well for your scene. And then there's a blur focus distance, and it uses that depth pass to shift the depth in the scene. And it can create this nice, slightly more cinematic look and feel. And you could animate that, shifting the focus in the scene. Then in the final animation, which I shared at the beginning of this video, I added some quick 2D motion graphics just with Oppenheimer and Barbie, which were linked up to that tracking point we had for the bottom of each of our characters, which is why they're jumping around slightly crazily, but I kind of liked it. You could also do a separate render of the background by itself without the characters. Go to runwayml.com and use their Gen 1 AI video-to-video creator, which I think can do clips up to 15 seconds long at the moment. Upload your background, and then using an image reference or a text prompt, have it recreate the animation, maintaining that camera movement, but with a new look and style to the sequence. For example, we could write Rainbow Unicorn World with lollipops and daisies, drop down advanced, set the frame consistency to 1.2, style weight, maybe increase that so we get more impact from our text prompt, and structure consistency, put that down to 0 so it'll match our video source as much as possible to try and maintain that movement. Press preview to see what it comes up with. Make sure to tick upscale, and these are pretty crazy. Change it to dark, apocalyptic, rainbow unicorn world with lollipops and daisies. Press preview again. There we go, that's a bit more interesting. I'm going to try out this one here. Press generate video, and that's completed, and we can press play to see what it's done. Obviously quite psychedelic, but you can see it's matching some sort of movement from our camera. So I'm going to press download, and then you could just drop that scene into Adobe After Effects, but I want to try out this other bit of software called Topaz Video AI, which is a paid bit of software, but there is a free trial which you can test, which puts a watermark over the footage, but it allows you to upscale the footage and improve the quality, and it uses AI to do that. So up in the video settings, I'm going to upscale the footage, so it's going to be 4K. I'm going to change the frame rate to 60 frames per second, and we're going to go with fine tune and enhance. And we're going to leave everything else as it is. For the sake of testing, I'm also going to run it 3 more times, once with Artemis Denoise Sharpen, once with Thea Details Fidelity, and then one more with Proteus Fine Tune Enhance, but enabling stabilization and turning on Reduce Jittery Motions. It's taking between 5 to 6 minutes to process the footage. That's finished processing. This is the original Runway ML clip, which is pretty cool. Slightly lower resolution, and it's particularly flickery, and there's quite a few artifacts in the image. Then we have our 4 clips. This is the one with Proteus Fine Tune Enhance. The upscaling has done a really nice job. It looks quite good. I can't see much difference in the quality of the flickering, but I think some of the artifacts have reduced. It's quite hard to tell. This is the one with Thea Details Fidelity. It seems quite noisy still. This is the Denoise Sharpen, and it does look crisper, but again there is quite a bit of flicker as it moves around. And this is the one with Fine Tune Enhance and that Reduce Jittery Motion, and it has removed an awful lot of that jitter to the image. It's much more consistent throughout. So it might be a case of the one with the denoise plus the Reduced Jittery Motion could work. And I'm just rendering out a sequence with all 4 of those in a 4K comp just to play them all at the same time to see if there's a way to tell the difference. Let me know what you think in the comments, but my main takeaway is the one with Reduced Jittery Motion looks a whole lot smoother. Back in After Effects before bringing that background in, I've done a quick render of the characters with the lightsabers and the shadows on a transparency. To make sure those lightsabers render with transparency, in the render settings of their effect, you can go down composite settings and change it from black to transparent. So I've brought that background scene that's been upscaled using Topaz AI, and I've dropped it in below our characters, and we've got our separate character passes here. And I've also added a separate shadow only pass, which I've put at the very top, on top of a lens flare. I've adjusted the lighting and chosen some different lens flares, and I've also added a second lens flare, which is using the luminance channel from those character passes. And we're just getting some nice bright lens flares. So as we go through, we get this over the top Wonderland sort of feel to it, which is pretty bloody fun. Also on that character layer, I've added a brightness and contrast and a hue and saturation just so they fit in the scene even better. I might quickly try out a few other backgrounds generated with Runway ML before we wrap up this video. And that's a wrap. That brings me to the end of the tutorial, as we've done a big deep dive into creating 3D animation using Wonder Studio, and then looking at creating character passes using Blender, adding tracking points and lightsabers, rendering that sequence out, bring it into After Effects, doing some compositing, creating a background image using Midjourney, and then using a displacement map to make it slightly 3D and link it up to a camera, apply various different effects to make the scene look richer and richer, and then exporting a separate background into Runway ML, and then using Topaz AI to upscale that image and refine the quality, and bringing it all together in After Effects. So one last time, please press subscribe, and if you can't press subscribe because you haven't got a YouTube account, get a YouTube account, press subscribe. And also, head over to aianimation.com to see what's going on. All right, cheers.